This is the very first portable incarnation of Compile's Aleste series of shoot-'em-up games. And I really dig this cover art. It has a very early 90s anime vibe to it. Now you might be saying, Aleste, what's that? But chances are that if you were into shoot-'em-ups in the 90s, or 90s shoot-'em-ups, you have heard of some of the other games in the series. For example, MUSHA on the Genesis is actually MUSHA Aleste. Space Megaforce on the Super Nintendo is actually Super Aleste, and Power Strike on the Master System is the very first Aleste game, ported from the MSX. You might even recognize the music, which has been used in both Power Strike and MUSHA Aleste. Okay, well, let's start the game and see how it stacks up to other Compile offerings. Now, one thing you might notice is that the game is quite zoomed in. While that's not unusual for a portable game of this era, it does change the feel quite a bit. Everything just seems more claustrophobic. But it also means that the game can create more chaos with fewer enemies on screen. And like other Aleste games, the enemy patterns really are quite dense and don't let up. And it has many other things in common with the other Aleste games. For example, many stages start with super fast scrolling to get you pumped. They have enemies that split apart and recombine, bullets that have gravity-influenced patterns, the familiar P icons that power up your main weapon. And, of course, who can forget the driving, densely arpeggiated music? It's not an Aleste game without that. But the game isn't as cinematic as something like MUSHA, even though I think it's better paced. The levels are short and do the job well, but there's nothing too dramatic that goes on. Unfortunately, it's also a bit less on the creative side, compared to that or even Space Megaforce. However, it makes up for it with well-planned levels and plenty of action. That isn't to say that it lacks drama entirely. The sequence of the game's levels build towards the conclusion in a satisfying way, and there are some memorable parts such as the train convoy in the canyon, and the game's final boss will surprise you. So while it's lower key than some of the Aleste games on the big consoles, it's certainly not phoned in. Now, the game gives you several weapons to grab as you fly through its various stages. In normal mode, the homing gun is way overpowered, as it is in many shooters of that era. For example, Thunder Force 3, where you can pretty much use the homing gun the whole time. But in special mode, each flying enemy you destroy unleashes aimed shots called suicide bullets. In this mode, you're going to want to be much more selective with your targets, or you'll find yourself quickly overwhelmed with bullets coming from every direction, unless you're really good at dodging. And this is the mode where GG Aleste really shines. In this mode, every weapon has its own purpose, so you have to be much more strategic when you play. Although in this video I'm mostly playing in normal mode because it's hard enough to play this through a camera viewfinder without suicide bullets. So what are all these weapons good for? Well, let me give you a rundown. The laser is really good for powerful focused blasts, and with a little bit of practice you'll be able to precisely sweep it to destroy more enemies at a time. Then you've got the napalm. That gives you more coverage and also takes care of a lot of the suicide bullets. And these two are very powerful, so they're ideal for boss battles. Then you've got spread. Now, spread is a good middle ground. It's a powerful shot up close, but it spreads apart halfway up the screen. Then you've got wide shot and homing. These are really good for normal mode and not so much in special mode as I had explained before. So like in Space Megaforce or many other Aleste games, there's a good variety of weapons to pick up for various situations. So yeah, GG Aleste has a decent amount of depth for a shooter of its era. Now this one is really hard to find though. It's a fairly rare game, and I finally snagged a copy on eBay for, wasn't a small amount, but it wasn't $150 either. There is a sequel called GG Aleste 2, sometimes called Power Strike 2, but no relation to the Master System Power Strike 2. And that one got releases outside of Japan, so it's a bit more common. And I'll remind you, it's always worth holding out for a decent price, because people on eBay love to gouge. Now that about wraps it up for GG Aleste. You also might have noticed I sound a bit hoarse, and the reason is I got a flu at a chiptune concert, and I spent a couple days in bed getting reacquainted with the Game Gear. And so, after this review, I'm going to go over a bit of the Game Gear library that I own, and talk briefly about the games. So yeah, I was sick off and on for about a week with a bad cold or flu or something, and this little guy kept me company. I have a few other portables, but I decided to bust out my Game Gear because it's been a long time since I played it. And it did not actually disappoint me. I was surprised. And I just wanted to go through some of the games that I have for this thing. I had one of these back in the day. After I had my Atari Lynx, I bought a Game Gear. I actually traded it in for a Game Gear because of this game. A friend of mine had Halley Wars, and this is a port of an 80s shmup, and it's very much that old school style. But yeah, I saw this and I thought, there's nothing like this on the Lynx. Of course, there are definitely games on the Lynx that I missed after I sold it. Just like I missed stuff on my Genesis after I sold that for a SNES. But yeah, some other stuff that I have for this, which I think are kind of neat and I want to talk about. We got Rystar, and this is a semi-port of the Genesis game, and it's quite a good game actually, and this is a great version of it that diverges a bit from the Genesis original, and actually fixes a couple issues I had with it. Like this one really annoying boss we had to do with numeric sequences, and they took that out of here, which is a smart move, and there's some entirely new stages and stuff. We've got Woody Pop. I spent a long time in bed playing this, and it's kind of like a cuter, cozier Arkanoid. Levels go by fast, I think because of the small screen, so the stages are tinier, which I think really actually helps the pace. I never had that issue in this game that I do with Arkanoid, where I have one block left and it's bouncing everywhere but that one brick. Maybe I just suck at those things, I don't know. Got Wonder Boy. They named Revenge of Drancon, Purple Drancon. It's an okay port. It looks good enough, but the small screen, cropping off some of the action does make some of the jumps quite cheap, which is too bad. But still, it's Wonder Boy on the go. We've got Triple Trouble, which is, I think, the last proper Sonic game for the Game Gear, and it's actually really good. It's a pretty respectable Sonic. It tries a little bit too hard to be like the 16-bit Sonics, and I think I prefer stuff like Sonic 2 and Sonic 1 that don't do that, which are a little bit more modest in scope, and I consider Sonic 1 to be, for the Game Gear, to be one of the best in the side-scrolling Sonic games. Really good. I actually have a review of that if you want to see it. Next we've got tried to play Shinobi, and to be honest, I'm not super impressed with Shinobi. It's good enough. It tends to be very memorizing, and so if you like games where you have to do stages, and it's kind of like Mega Man where you can pick what stage you start on, and if you do it in a specific order, it gets a bit easier. And there are, of course, secrets that are only unlockable if you do it in a certain order and stuff like that. But it's very memorizing. It's kind of almost like R-Type or something, which I don't enjoy as much as a You know, but you know, if that kind of stuff doesn't bum you out, you might give this a shot. We've got Monaco GP2, and it's a pretty interesting racing game. It's pretty tense, and it has interesting controls where, since there's only 2 real buttons, instead of having up accelerate and shifting with the buttons, you automatically accelerate, and you just control the gear shifts. If you're shifting down, you're braking. If you're shifting up, you're accelerating ahead. In a kind of a racing game context like this, it works for this kind of a racer because you know you're accelerating, turns coming up, you slam on your brakes, take the turn, punch the accelerator. And it's kind of like when I play F355, I'm either always flooring it or slapping on the brakes, it seems like. So I don't really miss the control. It's kind of an interesting way of doing things on a limited device like this, and this one's pretty good. Better than the first one. Space Harrier, which I'm a big Space Harrier fan. I love that game, and just, you know, it's a kind of a sludgy version of it, but just having it on the go is pretty cool. Would have been better on the Lynx, gotta say, because the Lynx does scaling and all that stuff. This is okay. It's a respectable port. Not perfect. I enjoy it. Psychic World, which is one of the few ports from the MSX computer original. I think it was MSX, might have been PC-88. It's a Japanese home computer game either way. And you know, if you play a lot of home computer games, you kind of know what kind of budget they're working with. It's not as slick as a console-only game. They did tune it up a little bit, I think, for the Game Gear, but it's fairly clever. It's though it's rough around the edges, and I like this one. I've still only been at the stage 2 boss, so don't take that too seriously. Maybe I'll review it in the future. I'll get farther. And yeah, that's about it for what I played on the Game Gear when I was lying in bed. So yeah, I think it's a pretty game system. If you like these old portables, you know, worth a shot. Okay, well, I'll see you next week.